watch us later and kind of know what went on. We tend to start on these calls, and knowing that after ESHIP, after the initial attendee email goes out, there will be more people joining calls. Number one, to see what else is going on, and then so what we saw last year was this spike of calls, right? Like everybody comes on, and then they decide where they figure out where their energy is in relation to the work that's being done, the work they want to be involved in, and then it tends to drop and then level out. So I think this year will be a little bit different since we're talking about RFPs and funding and all of those things. For those who are on the call, since this keeps coming up, especially in regards to Forward Cities, because Faye and Nick were up on stage. Forward Cities is an example of an initiative and an effort that aligns with some of the goals. It is not the answer to whatever 5-point whatever initiative it is. It's not like the only thing. It is an example of something that was happening, that the Kauffman Foundation was already in discussion with months and months before the initiatives kind of got fleshed out. So the relationship with Forward Cities and the Kauffman Foundation predates goal initiatives, and I want to make sure that people know that. I'm going to make sure that if it was not clearly expressed in the recent couple of weeks, that we make sure that that's verbalized. So that's also part of the sharing back with the community, because there seems to be a lot of questions like, oh, well, they seem to have decided that these are the people that are doing it, and so that's out of the question, and that's not necessary. It's not really true. So, but I feel like the three of us that are on the call now kind of knew that already, because there's been discussions amongst the communities already, right? So anyway, there's that. So part of this call is asking, as people on board, what kind of call should this be? And I kind of put that out there to the rest of the groups that I talked to, and having lots of conversations among the ESHIP team, Christine, myself, Andy, Lauren Higgins, a little bit some with Enoch. I think the direction seems to be, there's a bunch of people who just want to get on and do stuff and do projects and all of that. And then there's some people who are going to come on these calls, and they're still trying to figure out what the heck ESHIP is. What is ecosystem building? How does it translate to their community? And they're still they're also part of the community. And so the doers, the people that just want to get to work, probably not the same patience of level setting, and feel this urgency to get work done, and work needs to get done. But there's also people that we should welcome into the community so that they can also move towards doing something. So it seems to be that there will probably be 2 calls, because we talked on an earlier call, right, Eric, about having part of the call be a check-in and part of the call be, so what's going on in your community, and then another part of the call being, here's the updates on the project. It's a lot to do in an hour, and it's really hard to level set with new people on the call all the time. So it maybe becomes more of a working group call, means that we're just all working on this initiative in some unique and bespoke ways. And custom and bespoke, those are Andy's favorite terms. Custom and bespoke ways. And then there's a group of people who are working on project initiatives that want to make sure that they're aligned and there's visibility and maybe some coordination, possibly even some collaboration in there. And they need to be on a call with the same people or the same talk about projects and more of an actual working group, like project group. Does that sound like it makes sense?
Yep, does to me. Especially given, not knowing who the attendees are going to be, we're going to need that flexibility. But obviously, I think the intention of these in the beginning was really to push forward on these goals. And some of us, I'm not necessarily one of them, but some are chomping at the bit to go. And so I still feel like I have a lot to learn, but I definitely count myself in that camp, I'm ready to roll up sleeves and get to work.
And Cecilia's heard me probably at least twice on this. I think I might have been lurking on another call too. I think that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think, and I want to say, I think Avery, of the people I've heard describe it, I think Avery Kent probably described it best, and I won't try and recap it. But basically, there was a sort of an intro. There's got to be some kind of an on-ramp for folks who are just getting interested in the work, but we don't want to have kind of what the more working project management kind of calls. We don't want to have those, take 20 minutes to kind of reintroduce the concept, and that just leads to frustration for a ton of people. So having some way to continually bring folks into this conversation in a meaningful way, I think is important. But a lot of people want to just dig in and do some work.
Yeah, and what could be really cool is the new people could have that one call that was more informative and on-ramp, as you say, Eric, and then they could be in listening mode for the working group call. Mm-hmm. They felt comfortable to dive in, which could come quickly. Everybody will have their own learning curve on that. So they could be getting kind of the, 101 support that they need and still feel welcome to participate at that higher level.
That's a good point. I like that.
I like that too. I like that it's not exclusive. It is inclusive. At the same time, it doesn't bog down the conversation so that things actually keep progressing. And then if they have questions or if they have comments or whatever, that they can engage. So one of the things that we thought about doing, and Eric was really good in reminding me. So what we'll do is we'll collect between the initiative briefs that were done at the summit, as well as some of the ones that people have been working on, and try to collect them all in the same place. My idea or my thoughts around the ESHIP team is that we would put it out there for people to be able to comment on, but not to edit. And then the project teams themselves can decide how to edit it or whether or not they want to include the new information. So so it doesn't detract from the work that they're doing, but it still has the hive mind, bigger brain power of people plugging in. There was a talk. So Eric, you were on that Connected Networks call. Were you the 505 that jumped off? Were you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think, I had some conflict for.
Okay. So you heard the first part of the call. I finally listened to the second part of the call just this morning as I uploaded it. So it'll be interesting. So they talked about project management tools, and my personal opinion, which is not reflected anywhere else at this time, is that I want to be very clear about that. I think, I feel like there should be some approach on an entrepreneurial, and the entrepreneurial approach to problem solving is not that we can have tools and resources that are provided, but then it becomes like a Kaufman initiative, and that's not necessarily what we're trying to solve for. This is ecosystem building by ecosystem building practitioners for ecosystem building practitioners, and Kaufman is the convener of this because we're able to, and so the work of Christine and I are trying to make sure that you have the resources. If the resources are, we need project management tools, and we end up spending money on project management tools, my concern is there won't be money for projects. So there's only a certain finite amount of resources, and do we use the resources to fund the projects, or do we use the resources to fund the tools for greater alignment in doing this? So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm I don't have any strong opinions. I mean, it's sort of like it would be nice if, and I'm not sure if they're in those kinds of conversations, but if one of the entities that's providing a good platform, if they can, do a reduced price or some other kind of thing, make it available. And I think one of the models that I go back to fairly often, because they were pretty successful in the early going, was when basically startup weekends be turned into Up Global and some other things. They got a fair number of good partners on board to do things like that. And I think I've seen similar efforts kind of struggle to do that. I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like some, to their point, just to kind of convey what I gleaned from that conversation, I think one of their points was, if we think of ourselves or think of this effort, we sort of, they recommended having some kind of platform technology so that if people were working on, say, goal 2, but that goal 2 is going to now work with, say, goal 4 on some initiatives, or some initiatives in goal 2 are going to work with goal 4 as initiatives, that having the same project management tool would be particularly useful. So to the extent that we can have that sort of interoperability between the different goals, that felt like it would reduce a lot of the kind of the friction and hurdles and that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what we haven't costed it out or anything like that yet. So, but that was part of the thinking.
I think so. Part of that collaborative culture piece is trying to see where the alignments are. So maybe that's that's looking at those 30 initiatives, at least the 30 right off the bat, and saying, well, this initiative really does rely on this initiative, so trying to get those groups together, right? That's where the alignment piece comes in, and then if they're aligning together, then getting the project team that's working on this and the project team that's working on this to say, hey, so we're thinking about using Trello. How do you feel about using Trello? No, I'd rather use Asana, that kind of thing. So that conversation should be had, in my opinion, between those project groups, not as, me, the community activator, coming in and going, oh, so you should both be on the same platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that strong opinions. I get both approaches. A different sort of, not Trojan horse kind of way, but one way to look at it is if you get one project that goes after, maybe they got a relationship with somebody at Basecamp and they say, hey, we're doing a lot of things to encourage more democratization of entrepreneurship, and we know that you're kind of in that boat. Would you be willing to cut us a deal or something like that on X number of projects? So I could see that happening, and then if that moves, that might move faster than the big ship deciding, yes, we want to go with this one platform. And then, if that could be shared with or if the other, groups come on board with something like that, that might be a more organic way to approach it. The group that was on the call is pretty, they're all go-getters. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some looking at that kind of stuff already.
That would be good. How else would, because Brett, now you have a unique experience, because basically you're coming up with processes that are used, but then they have to be modified and customized for specific cities, right? So it's almost like this goal work.
Yeah, it is. And, so I guess we're a microcosm of this in a sense of task and project management, because I have to be on page with what's happening in right now 8 different cities, on our national 2-year engagement work and our 6-month kind of runway work that we're doing in half those cities. So, it really falls on me in a lot of ways to be specific about the approach we take in base level communication. We use Asana we use Slack for that. And currently for task management, we use something called Plutio. And it becomes very apparent very quickly how effective that tool is. And, if we were trying to do this on different tools, so for example, we are actually trying to do this for different tools. Without going too deep, LISC uses some different tools, and so they never ported over to Plutio. They want to do everything in Box, and even project management in Box. So we're just setting up folders to really load up for meetings and things like that, using a cloud folder as a project manager. And it's been tricky, because I'll go in and do a lot of task management in Plutio, which is clunky, and Faye and I both agree needs to change. But it really makes it difficult to stay on the same page. And if there were more people at Ford Cities that had to work with these LISC cities, I'm the only one, it would be really tricky because I'd be indoctrinating them in speaking 2 languages at once. So yeah, it sounds pretty obvious to me that, we'd want to get on the same page on that.
So I think it's part of it up to the community to share that information amongst ourselves, and then part of it to have that conversation with me and Christine and Andy and whoever to pull that up, raise the flag and say, hey, by the way, this would be helpful. But then Christine could actually engage a national resource provider like Basecamp, Asana, Trello, and say, you could actually be our national resource provider in this is what you provide for the community to be able to create. So there's a lot of talk around all these things, and maybe part of the Google form is what I was planning to do was put together a Google form of what this call should be. And it sounds like if we do 2 calls, then there's less of a need for what this call should be, right? Because one of them is more specifically oriented to project work, and one of them is more specifically oriented to being part of a community call, right? So if that's the case, then we don't necessarily need to have what is this working group call, and more of what are the immediate needs that you think of for doing this work? Is it a project management tool? Is it monthly newsletter update, whatever, to keep people abreast? Is it taking whatever changes you're making in the stuff that you're doing and uploading that to the dashboard so that there's more transparency and visibility and alignment between what everyone's working on? Like, how do we create the framework for, it's so strange to say, how do we create the framework for grassroots efforts? And because they're grassroots, people don't think that it needs framework, but it actually needs more. It just has to be squishier than regular framework, right?
Totally.
A lot of head nodding.
So what else are you feeling with all this?
Let me dig on that point. I think it's tricky too, because our work requires us to engage all 4 levels: grassroots, grass tops, tree roots, treetops. And there's a lot of people the higher up in elevation that you get that are more apt and ready to jump into, a unified project management effort. And what I've found in cities that we work with is that the more grassroots or more the more end user, some of these entrepreneurs in neighborhoods of disadvantage that we try to work with, the harder it is for them to engage because they don't have experience using some of these tools. And it's just something to be sensitive of. It's not, I'm not saying there's a reason to, take a different direction, but it's something that I know our local directors, our project managers have struggled with a little bit. Even on simpler things than project management. We're rolling out a survey in Richmond right now that will help us move through our community canvas process. And it's been live for over 2 weeks, and we've gotten 2 responses out of 14 people. So you run into some of these, what seem like obvious solutions, given the type of work we do, given the type of backgrounds that we have, they have some maybe blind spot challenges that you have to deal with in order to effectively engage.
It's fascinating. How many people, I'm just curious, were at the Forward City Summit?
We had 237 registered. I would guarantee that we didn't have 237 show up, but I'd say we were right around 200. I never heard a final number. I think they're still processing, but yeah, right around 200 to 210.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Nick just sent out the survey of these are how many people responded to the survey, and and I know that's always a challenge at events, at all kinds of things, right? So I don't know how many people I'm sure I can look, and I will, about how many people responded to the ESHIP survey. Eric has plenty of experience, at Startup Champions, to look at how many people respond to those things. And there was trying to gauge things like cultural competency and inclusion, and not having the people respond back, or not having as much of a sampling as you need is frustrating. So it's I don't know how it gets any better, especially as we get more tech focused on how to do that.
Yep.
Just one thought for the next and potentially final, I guess, ESHIP or something, but maybe you got to fill out some of those surveys before you even get in the door. The registration, because I don't remember too much in advance of that. Maybe there's a little bit.
So we definitely did have the survey prior to attending ESHIP, because as part of registration, you had to answer a whole bunch of questions, right? So you couldn't even register for the event until you said, have you been to an ESHIP before? What is your knowledge of, certain things? So there's all of those. But once you get there, you can't measure the impact of what you had at the event if people don't respond to it afterwards. So does it need to be a carrot? I don't know. Does there need to be swag involved? If I know Menti is fun when you're there, right, and small groups, but then how do you translate that? And so Eric, at the Forward City Summit, they had this entrepreneur game that Forward City's metrics team had put together, which is really interesting. I'd spoken with a friend of mine who works for GoDaddy, and he was saying that and I shared this with Faye, some of the things that you might want to consider in putting together a game like that is to actually talk to gamers, because people who create online games know enough about psychology to say, if this happens, then this will be a reaction, more. And so they curate their games for human response.
Right.
as opposed to these are the things that we need to solve for, so these are the questions we need to ask, right? So it's more of a behavioral model. And I think collaborative culture, just going full circle with this call, is a lot of how are people going to react? And then we create the things to support the kind of behavior we want to model. Right? So we create collaborative culture by modeling what's needed to create what's possible. But if we do this, then people are more apt to be collaborative. So it's almost like a chicken and egg thing, but we just don't think about those things in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is, as an organization that really prides itself on human-centered design, user experience is such a huge part of that. Then you have to be not only intentional about how you're going to receive that information, but then pretty intentional about how you're going to let it shape your process. So, there's this whole UXD element to this that could come into play as well and help to ensure a higher quality feedback loop.
Yeah, because otherwise you solve for stuff that you think is the problem.
Yep.
Because you only hear from people who are the type A personalities, the joiners, it's like the whole conversation around employee resource groups and how employee resource groups are what a lot of the corporations are going towards, right? So everybody has a diversity, equity, inclusion manager. They host employee resource groups. And then Deloitte, like a year and a half ago, broke the mold, and people thought they've lost their minds when they disbanded the employee resource groups. Because why would you do that? And they said, well, we found that a certain flavor of people join employee resource groups. And so that's the representation that you get. But then you create silos in themselves because the groups are together with like-minded, identifying people. And the power dynamic still sits with cis white hetero male. And almost never are they in employee resource groups. So they're not at the table where all these conversations are taking place.
Yeah.
So how do you change a demographic or a dynamic if you're still siloing people? So it's an interesting conversation.
Is that part of Deloitte's the people analytics that I just read about?
Yeah, it might be. So I know that they model a lot after Kenji. If I'm still trying to get through this because it's a book that's fascinating to me, but I never find enough time to read it. Kenji Yoshino, who's an NYU professor, wrote a book called Covering, and it's about all of the things that we do personally and as a society to assimilate to culture. So what people do is they cover who they actually are so that they can better fit in, and how that detracts from all the energy that you could be utilizing to do other things like being innovative and creative, because you're spending all of this energy to cover up who you are. So if you have people that you work with and you ask them, so how was your weekend? What did you do? And they go, it was fine. And then they just don't talk to you about it. Maybe some of that is because they don't feel like you might feel like their activities were, whatever, or have pictures on their walls of their family and stuff like that. It's interesting how much we cover up who we are. So.
I love it. It's good framing.
Yeah, I don't know. And so to talk about how we become more collaborative is really about how we also let people be who they are so that the collaboration can happen. And as opposed to we'll be collaborative the way Kaufman wants us to be collaborative, because
Well, So one thing that I feel about like in this goal, so I think the initiatives are sort of okay, but it's I mean there are some aspects that are definitely sort of crux cutting or more maybe platform kind of things among the goals. I wouldn't necessarily consider the collaborative culture aspect to be quite that, but it is one of those things that say like storytelling. I wonder about like, you know, believing in goal two and the power of collaborative work. Maybe there's opportunity for folks from this group, if it grows larger than just a couple of people, to kind of to get on some of the calls from some of the other goals and say, well, how can we make this more collaborative? Just like you might say, you know, what's your thinking about how can this be an equitable process, you know, on some of the different goals.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's, you know, something for the future. I think right now we probably need to learn how to, you know, chew our own food and and work on the initiatives. But it feels like, you know, in the future, one of the things that would be really valuable, I think that just about everyone is having another set of eyes occasionally come in and say, you know, have you thought about this kind of approach for how you're designing this so that you're doing it in a way that I know you're going to get there further, you're going to get there faster if you do something where, you know, person X comes up with the plan and they enlist some people and you move forward, but we're not necessarily building the connective tissue we need in order to make this a longer term success. How can we, you know, just bringing that kind of lens to different discussions, I think might be valuable. I don't know if that has a place in this call, but just a thought.
I think it always has a place in the work that we do. What do you think, Brett?
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
And I think we do that too much, right? It's like the employee resource group type model where we cluster with people that think like us, talk like us. It's also an inclusion thing, right? So we talk about inclusive field, and if we don't have the perspectives from people, especially then that's why I appreciate people like you and Hassan, Eric, because you're on more than one goal call, so you really do have this overarching view of what's going on, and it's really important to share that perspective, like, have you thought about this, or how is this representing, and we have to be mindful of those things, because otherwise things happen and it doesn't solve for, again, like Brett's work, it doesn't solve for the greater community. It only solves for your particular, because that's the only lens you have. A lot of the inclusion work that I've been around, I try to give the space and the grace of, you don't know what you don't know. Have you thought about this? Well, I don't know. I've never experienced it that way. So how can you solve for it? It's the same pushback of certain demographics where you go, oh, well, I understand what it is to be a minority female. So I get all of the minority female stuff. Like, I get it. Right. And I have no clue sometimes, much of the time, about what it's like to be, name your demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we utilize this all-encompassing mindset and make sure that gets infused to the work that we're working on? And I feel like I want to look at some of the initiatives. Where's my dashboard of tools? Okay, so I should have these things memorized, right?
That would be amazing. I'll just say that would be amazing.
I have some. I do have some. I also feel like what's going to happen on this dashboard is that, and here, I'll just put the link in the chat. So I feel like what's going to happen in this dashboard is that we're going to have to create a dashboard for each goal, so that the dashboard for the goals becomes like goal 1 has its own page, and the video recordings for all of goal 1 go there, and then all the project templates go. So a regional ESHIP summit, and I know Eric, you've been working on some of that stuff, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, that's, let's see. So, and I think that's, well, I think a lot of these topics are, I'm pulling up there it is, pulling up your link. Perfect. So yeah, on, regional ESHIP, I think that's gone a couple different directions. Did I lose you? Sorry, my computer's stuttering over here for a
No,
little
you're
bit.
fine.
We got you.
It feels like the where we'd arrived at in terms of briefs, it seemed like that was somewhat cohesive. I was part of one of the groups that discussed this at ESHIP. Christopher was I'll just say a leading contributor on the table that I was part of. I haven't had a chance to look. I saw some of the notes from the other group that was also looking at it, but it seems like it's one of the more discrete, straightforward approaches to doing something among the different initiatives that I've looked at, in terms of, because there are, in some ways there are already opportunities to maybe bundle an ESHIP-like experience in whatever region with existing conferences, while trying to make sure that it retains that focus on the ecosystem builders themselves. So it felt like it had a fair amount of traction in terms of communities that are interested in having something like this in their home. But what is the essence, and what are the key components to that ESHIP experience that we don't want to lose, even if it is in one of these different smaller community or region that's pulling in fewer people? How do we balance that with maybe less capacity? You don't have the Value Web, you don't have Wellington, you don't have like this huge apparatus that's able to help with these things. That was kind of the ongoing discussion. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing we saw at both at the table and in the discussions, and I want to say Jackie and facing on one of the folks' names who was participating in those conversations with this. But I think we recognize that a lot of the value coming out of this is really in the getting people together, part of even just a proposal process for a region to do these kinds of things. How do we set it up in a way where, we're encouraging them through the need to do some kind of submittal, some kind of application process, and the actual planning of the event, that they're doing the work of really knitting their community together in a more valuable way as they do that. So I think we recognize that event is something that there's the event itself, but there's all the process leading up to it and the relationships and some of that continuing on. So I think we are consciously looking at both levels. But I'm not sure if that answers your question. No,
I think it's fascinating, because then I look at Brett and I think about this stuff that Forward Cities does in putting together that team of people that are part of the work that they're doing in the respective cities. So what is it, you talk about ESHIP, regional ESHIPs. What is it specifically about regional ESHIP that resonates with you? Is it the fact that we're not hosting a conference where it's panels and speakers? It's actually more small group collaboration. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is it that we're all solving for something? I mean, what is it in your mind? What is a regional ESHIP?
Brett, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah. So in my opinion, our work is really driven around, let's get specific with the barriers that a neighborhood or community is facing, and how we might look to overcome those. The more regional approach or the more, I don't want to say regional, the more expansive approach of a regional ESHIP summit, to me is solidifying a overall ecosystem of support for all members of a community. And so I'm like seeing this big mothership, over a city, and then at any time people can just beam up to that and come back down in our model and work very locally. But you know, every city has specific neighborhoods within it, and then they have, you know, suburbs outside of it, right? So you could see like 12 different points of smaller ecosystems tapping into the larger resource bank that runs that. And we do that so well here in the Triangle. Before this work, I worked for the Research Triangle Park, and we built a physical ecosystem that was kind of like a hands-off incubator, and had 80 startups and another 15 companies that were larger than startup inside of it. And that number's, it's got to be 120 by now. And, you know, so we were able to do that. And then we were able to program and create events to draw people from all over the region in, even ones that didn't call that place home. So that felt like a continuous regional ESHIP summit. That was for everybody, that lent out understanding of resources and opportunities, that you know, really just informed the greater entrepreneurial population. And so, you know, it's great then, because then, you know, there's things going on in downtown Raleigh, or there's things going on in Durham. Chapel Hill's got its own vibe, and none of them really ever connect outside of this. Maybe granularly they do, but not, you know, as ecosystems. These micro ecosystems are pretty autonomous because they have to be, because proximity wise, that they're just not going to leave town to do their day-to-day work typically.
So interesting. So Eric, I'm curious, having been to other conferences as well as ESHIP, and working on this regional ESHIP model. So is it for you the idea of ecosystem building? Is it the style of conference it is, where it's more small group work and in shifting and sharing? Is it more about the topic, or is it more about the structure that resonates with you? And what about it do you want to bring forward into creating a template?
Great question. Weird answer. I don't know. So I think just in terms of the value, I think the attendees are the most valuable thing. Just the kind of the sense, the philosophy, the heart, the whatever, the fact that they're all kind of doers that are, you know, bringing hearts, minds, souls, whatever you want to call it, to this work. I think that's something that's still rare. There's a handful of things. I imagine the Forward Cities convening or summits to be that way, Code for America, those kinds of things where you've got those folks that are passionate coming together. I think structurally, I think it's a great example of the way the conferences that I like are moving anyway. So I wouldn't say that it's unique in that way. It's unique enough, but I think it's also, I see other folks moving toward that direction of more small interaction, you know, like the TED-like thing where you've got as much break time as you've got actual session time. So I think shifting the balances on that is good. So I'm going to agree with both points, and I think the topic, of course, is something that's of interest too. What I wouldn't want to lose, and I think is important to the regional leadership, is there's that aspect of building the field piece. It's something bigger than ourselves. And I think when we're talking about sort of community regional, what's the motivation for bringing this together? I think I could see the communities that are already pretty tight or doing well, the ecosystems that are doing pretty well. I could see this as something that they want to do. They already know they're pretty good, but they can use the work and they can use the visibility, et cetera. So I see value for them. I think when I look at it for what I was looking at it for, say, New Mexico, how would we do something like this? It's probably not the city. It's probably statewide or maybe even larger. But it's because we need, or we perceive that we need, outside folks to come to town so that we can, it's similar to the Rise of the Rest in a way. You know, everybody pulls together because there's, you know, some other big entity that's important, or there's some other people coming to town and we want to show our best selves, partially because of that. You know, we know good folks and we can solve this, but having that extra nudge from having that little bit of additional visibility and other folks that we want to work with there, I think that's something that adds value to communities like mine. So there's a lot of different special things that I think this offers, and that's been kind of part of the fun of looking into that initiative specifically, because there are all these different dimensions to it that I think are important.
So I had a call earlier today with a friend of mine in Greece who's putting together an agripreneur summit. So if you know anybody who's into agripreneur stuff, the future of farmers, then let me know. It's taking place in September in Thessalonica, Greece. So I could not think of a better place to want to hang out and learn about agripreneurship. But in talking to her, she asked me, so what worked and what didn't work? And we talked about some of those things, and some of the things that I felt compelled to share with her was a piece about the unconference, which I think was really important, because when you have an event like ESHIP where we're really going to be working on stuff and people come to a conference wanting to share and talk about certain things that they want to share and talk about, and not feeling like there's a place for that, that was definitely that steam valve that we talked about, letting some of that happen. So thank you, Eric, for helping to make sure that that went smoothly. So we appreciate you taking the lead on that, you and Hassan. But things like that are important, right? Because otherwise you end up with a million hallway conversations. That and the brain date thing, because I shared with people early in the conference planning stage. It's like, what happens inevitably at conferences that you get dealt business cards like somebody's playing blackjack and it's like collecting this stack of cards, right? And then it's not the got 'em, need 'em, kind of baseball card thing, but then you have to action on it. Like you want to connect, and sometimes you end up back from home from a conference and you're looking at this and you can't even remember like why you wanted to talk to these people in the first place, or did you even want to talk to these people? So making sure that you make that alignment at mealtime, right? So you set up those brain dates and you're actually have a conversation. So I know what you do, you know what I do, and it's not taking part in the middle of a conference where you should be attending plenary or, why are you here? And because most people will tell you they go to conferences to meet people. They want to meet people like them, or they want to meet people that will help them in the work that they do. So some of those things need to be intersected into your programming and given space for that. And if you don't set up time and space for it, then they take your conference time and they do it anyway, because that's their driver. So those are all interesting. And part of the collaborative culture piece is, again, solving for the natural tensions and things that are going to happen by creating an environment where you infuse that in. So unconference makes sense in a summit where you're going to be working on other stuff, and knowing that, and it becomes collaborative in a nature that you're allowing that to happen, because it's going to happen whether or not you allow it to happen, right? And so if you create space for it, then it won't take up space that's needed for something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I that's what I look at collaborative culture as being, is part of the creating an environment where things will naturally happen in a proactive way instead of a detractor, for whatever that's worth. And so that's what we have to solve for in the next 2-3 weeks, to share back with the attendees and the rest of the community of this is what's happened at ESHIP, because right now they're all like, so RFP process, right? So how are we going to do these calls? So what is this all about? And So any sharing, any ideas that come to mind, please let me know, because we're still solving for it. It's getting there, ish.
I think one of the challenges we'll have, I think, is once the road becomes a little less cloudy, is thinking that this is an important topic. Do we need to recruit, or how do we encourage people to become part of the collaboration table, and just not necessarily promoting, but I think there's a lot of value to be had in, even if it's not very project. This is one of the few areas where I think it's valuable to kind of just be talking with people out in the community about how they're approaching different things, whereas I don't necessarily feel that way across the other goals, not taking inventory. So I think there's room to grow and make this a place where the folks who really are all about how do you find ways to collaborate and strengthen collaborations at different levels, where those talents can be brought out, and we can really make it a resource for people who are in the wider world of ecosystem builders.
I like that. That's good. Brett, any other thoughts?
No, I wish I had some ESHIP Summit wisdom to, to go from. I hate that I missed that event. It seems pretty helpful in terms of visioning out some next steps. But I think, once it sounds like this RFP process is going to generate a lot of natural momentum. So once we start getting them in, I like the original idea. I mean, let's consider where you're at and are you here to learn, or are you here to contribute? And, let's get you activated appropriately. That
sounds great. Well, I think that's a really good wrap up. I have some asks of you, Brett. Mm-hmm. If I'm to introduce Forward Cities to somebody, can you email me a link or and use my mass collaboration email? Like, what's a good way to introduce Forward Cities to somebody, and who are the best people to engage in that conversation? Because that's just a personal ask for my community. Mm-hmm. I gotta get something moving. And Eric, if you will continue to help me bring an alignment around the ESHIP champions to get some of the work together that we've already done, so that we can share that with the community, as well as the work that we're going forward. So you worked on the brief. We're gonna create the next. I think we're going to end up using the Value Web model of what they used at the summit, and we're going to try to create it in a way that it'll all go in the same template, and then we'll post that up on the dashboard. So your added energy and enthusiasm in moving that forward, that would be absolutely great. So what can I do to help either of you?
Oh, well, I'm worried you're getting a cold or something. So I take care of yourself. That's my first thing, because you're indispensable, so thank you. You've got a lot of work to do, for until the end of time. So
hopefully they'll extend my contract just a little short of that.
Yeah, I should be fine. That sounds like a good, an appreciated ask on your part. So I'll put something together for you that helps communicate it out, and thinking about who to engage. Obviously, I think this is one of our bigger goals, is to support the larger ecosystem development that y'all are championing. So it might be a two-way street where I'm trying to bring people into this process as well.
Great. I think then together we'll all solve all the problems of the world and live happily ever after. So that's right. Oh, and they won't let me do like world revolution, so we have to do an evolution. So
okay,
I like it.
Revolutions can be really, really bad, I'll
Yeah,
just
messy.
say.
Super messy.
So, yeah.
So, and then we'll become a big t-shirt company because we keep coming up with kitschy little things to say.
Maybe you won't have to do this until the end of the time then. That's fantastic.
I don't know. We'll see. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you.
And
Good seeing your face. I think I was on a call with you before, Brett, and I think I was just on audio. So it's good to actually see you.
Yeah, good to connect, Eric. Hearing a lot of great things about you from Faye, so we're excited to
look
bring
at
you
that.
all in the fold.
Yay. All right. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks for arranging.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.